Okay, what's up, everybody? I've got Ryan Sullivan here, and he is a podcast expert. We hooked up on LinkedIn, and I am a huge fan of creating content and building a personal brand. Okay. And so I saw your stuff. I love your description of like who you are. It's your first podcast coach, the wedding planners of podcasting, founder, rapper, DJ, and host. And I saw some of your content that you're posting, found it really interesting, and I wanted to dive in with you because I'm a big fan of podcasts. And like I said, a big fan of content. So thanks for jumping on with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. This is cool, man. When I saw your studio, the YouTube and everything, I was like, this guy is very professional. That's one way that I would describe it in terms of the setup. So I'm excited to see where this conversation goes.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, hey, dude, I live and breathe this, man. I cut my teeth in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to make movies. I still do. I just wrote a movie. There's a producer looking at it now. And we're trying to make some offers to some people probably in the next 6 months because right now Hollywood is slow. US distribution is not good, but that's a story for another time.
Mm.
So like for me, making the content look incredible is like, that's what I do. That's like my jam, right?
Yep.
Studio, the camera, all that stuff. But the content matters, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit about sort of what you do. I want to lay that out for people so they understand who you are. And then let's jump into, podcasting in general and best practices, all that kind of stuff, so they can understand more about how important podcasting is.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, so we have a system to launch podcasts. We're a podcast launch, build, and growth company. I get asked all the time, like, yeah, so what's the difference between what you do and other people? And I really can't tell you. We just have our own way of doing it. And just to put it simply, if you are the person going through one of our programs, it's essentially like you mentioned, a wedding planner, but for your podcast. And I'll explain that because sometimes it takes a minute to kind of grasp that. I'm still working on that headline.
Yeah,
but I really try in all different ways to describe what we do. But it's essentially one-on-one coaching for podcasters. So we are building the show with you. And so it's the opposite of a traditional production company, which is you bring us the content and we'll just edit it. We're the opposite. We help you produce the show. We can edit it too, but our main bread and butter is being there with you to build it. So then basically what I say is you want to plan changes instead of changing plans, right? So you want to make it so basically every business, not all businesses need or all podcasts need a brand. I'll say that, right? So,
yeah.
But not all brands need a podcast. So it's not for everybody, but for the people who do fit in this medium, we really take that one-on-one approach to launching the podcast.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, so I come to you and I'm like, hey man, I want to start a podcast and I've got this idea. I work in this niche. This is kind of what I do. And you go, okay, I'm going to take this and I'm going to put my producer and my writer hat on. And I'm gonna create a brand around your podcast that we, target the people that we think are gonna, like that brand that we're creating for you and make sense.
Yeah, that's essentially it, because you can't see what you can't see. So
yeah,
a lot of time, what you don't want is to bring your idea to somebody and them to go, yeah, perfect. Talk about Hollywood. Like, I'm not there. I'm in Jersey, man. I never even been out there, but I was in the music industry. So there's a lot of that yes, man type of energy, right? And you really, if you're paying somebody, some people think that somebody pays you, right? And then you just tell them what they want to hear. My approach is tell them what they need to hear, So yeah, that's exactly the approach we take. Basically, whatever view you don't have, we're trying to take that view. To kind of create an objective look at what this podcast could be.
I think that's a good move because telling people the truth and being honest with them benefits your business, right? Mm-hmm. If you just take their money and you create something that doesn't work, how is that of value?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And here's the thing that we do is help listeners, right? I work with the hosts, not for the hosts. It's to help the person at the other end of this, right? Which is the listener of the podcast. So I work for the listeners. I'm the same way the host is the ambassador for the audience, right? It's like, Matt, you're going to ask questions that the audience can't ask because they're just listening. They're not in this conversation right now. That's your job. But my job is to make sure that's in their best interest as well, right? So it's like, the thing about a podcast is there's like 4 or 5 things always going on at one time, right? There's the
Right.
audience, there's what I'm going to say next, there's the question you're going to ask next. There's all these factors. So yeah, we're really like, we take the audience based approach to building your podcast. So then when you do roll it out, people go, oh, that's really cool. That's interesting. Like I'll tune into that. I understand what it is. That's what you want. When somebody lands on a podcast, you want them to go, oh, this is either for me or this is not for me.
That makes sense, and helping them define that audience. So, like as a coach, if I break that down, what you just said is that there's like this web, there's like probably 5 different things going on, like you said, in a podcast at any given time. You as a coach have to be able to assess those different avenues and what's going to be happening and sort of try to help the person that you're building the podcast for in that niche understand what the audience would want to hear.
Yep.
And then help them anticipate that, and then maybe help them structure the kind of questions that are going to resonate in that space.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Got you. That's like, so if you were coaching me right now on podcasting, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would come to you and I'd be like, dude, give me some pointers. What could I do to be a better host? And maybe you probably have some people you're like, well, you talk too much, or, you need to listen better. You need to structure a set of questions that are interesting at the end of the episode so that you keep people interested. Do you need a teaser at the beginning? I mean, what are some best like practices that you see that are like, okay, these are staples that you need when you start a podcast?
Yeah. So I think format's the big one. I think that I know because I know by the numbers. In 2020, a lot of people started interview shows, right? We've seen it. Your cousin did it. Your friend did it. Your best friend from high school made one about the NFL. Like everybody just went out and did podcasts, right? Which is good. I'm glad that happened, right? But the amount of podcasts being launched right now are down 70% from 2020, which is a good thing, right? Because podcasting is not easy, and a lot of people realize that. So but the predominant format was interviews, and you touched on, oh, maybe if the host talks too much, well, okay, well then maybe you should have a solo podcast, or you should have a co-hosted show. Mm-hmm. Or do you want to kind of ride the coattails of the guest and kind of tap into their audience? Well, okay, then they're going to talk most of the time, probably, right? So it's what we do is we match the strategy with the personality, and you don't have to work with us to do this. You can just do an analysis to figure out like, okay, if I define the audience and then I define what format fits for me, then boom, whatever the combination of that is, that's your podcast. But I love talking about formats, and I think the one that is now the new interview show, I'd say, or the more popular one, is co-hosting. And I think there's so many benefits. I think half of the podcasts we're launching, even so far in 2024, are going to be co-hosted podcasts. So it's not only a trend, it's a trend that makes a lot of sense to me. So I think that's the first question that, in terms of logistics, after we talk through why are you doing this, what do you want to get out of it, who's the ideal listener, then we can go, okay, is it co-host, is it interview, is it solo? I've done all of them. Is it webinar based where it's like a group of 4 or 5 people? But that's typically kind of the first place that people go.
That makes a lot of sense. So when you say co-host, let's go there for a sec, because that's a hot topic right now.
Yeah.
Co-host, are we talking 2 people in separate locations on the screen co-hosting? 2 people in the same location is hot. Does it work both ways? What's the format that works best when you're co-hosting?
Yeah, it works both ways. We have some podcasters who thought they were going to do virtual, and then they're like, oh, well, we live like 25 minutes from each other. And then they rented out an office space, set up a podcast studio in there, and they co-host their own podcast with occasional guests. Feral Minds is the podcast I'm thinking about. That's just one that we worked on that does that in-person co-hosting plus some guests. And then, most of the other podcasts we've worked on are the virtual. We have a show called Wealth Warehouse that we've produced for 3 or 4 years now, and they have been co-hosting virtually for 100 episodes, and they're at 70,000 downloads, somewhere around there right now. So it can totally work, whether you're
Mm-hmm.
virtual, in person. There's just benefits to either of them. I would say I had an in-person podcast, and there are a lot of really good things came out of that, but then it's really logistics heavy. So kind of
Yeah,
depends again on what you want.
I feel you there. What I love about podcasting is this. Let's say this is my viewpoint on it. I've got clients that I work with, a lot of clients, and I'll tell them, if they're good on camera, which some of them are great, right? I've got financial advisors I work with, and some of they're fantastic with their wealth of knowledge that they have. Perfect for a solo podcast. Yeah, they may not get 20,000 viewers a month,
Mm-hmm.
but at the end of the day, if they can just set it up, they've got content. And podcasts do provide a stream of content and thought leadership and marketing materials.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, that's valuable in itself, is it not?
You can hire a ghostwriter, but you can't hire a ghost podcaster, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
that's really it. It's just, it's like this. I get this every day where people are like, I know there's no replacement for video content, or I know there's no replacement for a podcast. And, or they'll say, I know I have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Even my coach is a 7-figure coach, and he coaches people on short form video, which I think is a great place to start. Hey, make 20 or 30 TikToks and you'll kind of know if you like to be on camera or not. But yeah, man, I'm totally with you. The personal brand benefits are what they are, but it's like you're never going to get to that level of somebody getting to know you on a text post. It's just not really going to happen.
No, you can't do that. You've got to get on camera and you've got to speak, and they have to understand who you are. If you're trying to sell people and you want them to give you money, one of the best things you can do is get on camera and actually express who you are and actually have people that know you, that have worked with you, talk to you.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
I mean, that's testimony. And I think
Yep.
that's so important in business. And what I'm finding is that there's a lot of validation in that for potential leads. I do a lot of offers, and I'm always, creating offers. And what I find is that the content goes so far. And a lot of times what you'll hear in marketing, it's funny, in the marketing side, it's always like, well, how do we quantitate when, you get to the higher levels of the executives who want to figure out, well, how did that make us money? And we can't really quantitate what it did for us. It's so hard to say what it did, even though there's an increase in sales, right? They never want to attribute it to the fact that they started creating content. But if they didn't start creating the content and do the podcast, they'd be out of business.
Yeah, and you can't track word of mouth, right? How do podcasts spread? There's no algorithm. Spotify has an algorithm. It's terrible. It's not even an algorithm. It doesn't even know what song to show you next, let alone a podcast, right? Like you listen to one country song and now your playlist is filled with a bunch of terrible country songs that you don't want, right? So it's like they can't even figure out how to give you a podcast you might like. So that's pros and cons, right? But there is no algorithm and there's no way to track that word of mouth. So, the way I look at it is brand, right? It's like there's marketing and then there's branding, and they're two different things. In a podcast can be in the marketing. It's created in the marketing lens, but it's really a brand play, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you get into the marketing of a podcast, then we're talking about a different beast, aren't we?
Yeah.
Because we go from like the inception, this nascent beginning of a podcast and creation of it and the format, right?
Yep.
And then we go into the recording of the podcast, getting the right guests, asking the right questions. And now we have this marketing part where we've got to cut it up into reels, promote it, create teasers if we want, put it out and start running ads. I mean, that's all marketing. So when we get into that part, how do you go there? Do you ever do anything where you're like, well, we need to market this podcast? How do we do that?
Yeah. I mean, for us, it's been organic social. Like you mentioned ads.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know a thing about it. Like maybe if you've messed around with podcast ads, you could tell me, because I don't really know. I have a partner, like an agency partner that does it, but I do strict, like essentially, splitting that, what you just said. One side is the podcast, the other side is the promotion.
Right.
So we've had success just using organic. I mean, some of our clients are running ads too, but we're really focused on how do you pull them in with the content? And yeah, it's not easy to do.
No, but it works.
It
That
works
that's
100%.
the
Yeah.
thing. The organic, you don't have to pay for the ads
Mm-hmm.
if you create the
Well,
content.
you make great ads too. If you make great organic, you'll then make great ads because you know what worked, right? It's like before you don't need if you win the race without nitrous, once you add nitrous, it's going to be crazy, right? So,
I feel you 100%. Um, I think that what I guess the thing for me is like trying to figure out what makes the most interesting podcast. That's something you can't really figure out.
I've
I
tried for
mean,
the last 5 years.
I know, right? And it's what do people want to hear,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, and I think it's passion, don't you? Don't you think it comes from a place of I'm really passionate about this subject?
Yeah. I mean, think about you, right? It's like when you do a podcast, I mean, if you even if especially if you do like a guest interview, right? It's like
Mhm.
after that, if they say to you like, "Oh, this was the best interview I've ever done," and all these things like all these positive things, they're in that mood where you don't get most people don't get in that mood until like unless you're having a real genuine conversation with somebody, and that's what podcasts create. So, I think that the you become a podcaster, and that is a thing that you either like feel those feelings and then you were like, oh my god, I'm chasing that feeling again for another episode, or you don't really feel those feelings. We're getting a little meta here. You don't really
Mhm.
feel that and you're just like, oh, maybe it's not for me, I'm going to go write a book, or something. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm with you. Like I've done it for 180 something weeks in a row because I just love when my audience asks me a question and I can make a whole 5-minute episode about it. I'm like, okay, great. Like that fuels me, right? So yeah,
Yeah,
there's
this
that
is a
passion
part of
side.
your life, part of your business model, man. This
Yep.
is how it actually becomes a part of your
It
life. Like
really
I get,
does.
yeah, I get like jacked. Like I'm like,
Yep.
I'm doing a podcast. I mean, I've got 3 podcasts. Like I love it.
Yep. I can tell.
This is what I do. Like, I mean,
Yep.
I have a corporate job. You probably know that I'm the director of the digital experience at Transamerica. Like, that's a huge
Yep.
job, right? But it doesn't mean that I can't take an hour during the
Mm-hmm.
day to do a podcast,
Yep.
right? And get it cut up. Like, I can.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because I love it. Now, I could take an hour and do anything else, right?
Yep.
I'm sure many people would like to do a lot of other things.
Yeah.
But for me, this is just like, talking about marketing and sales and content creation and stories. That's kind of where I live.
Yeah, and you can do that within any. You could do it yourself, like you were doing, where you probably had some help along the way, but it's like your vision, right?
Hmm.
And yeah, you don't have to be. I mean, even I'm like quote unquote the podcast guy in terms of like helping people launch their podcast. I don't make podcasts all day. It's like one part of my week. So it's like the rest of my time is sales, marketing, building my business. I have another business now that I just launched this year. So it's like, yeah, it's part of my life though. It's a habit that I have. And it sounds simple, but it becomes that.
Yeah, simple's good though, isn't it?
100%. Yeah, it's not going to be easy, but it can be simple. That's what I always say.
There's easy. It's simple to start, but it's not easy to continue, is it?
That's it. You nailed it.
Yeah. So many people fail in podcasting because that passion is not there. So
Yep.
maybe they start something for the wrong reasons. I want to get attention right away, and then it didn't get 2 million views the first episode I released on Apple Podcast and Spotify. They come crying to you about it. Does that happen? Do you hear this kind of thing?
Oh yeah, yeah, it happens. I mean, I think it happens because we didn't know where we wanted to go. So like we never set the GPS. So when it doesn't route us to the route to the place we wanted to go, then that's when when we're like, what happened? Well, what happened was we didn't know where we wanted to go. So that's why I think the planning is so essential because yeah, a podcast could have 100 downloads and be a 6-figure podcast, or a podcast could have 1 million downloads and make no money. So it's just like it doesn't completely correlate you know, downloads or metrics, right, with your expectations and your goals. I work with a lot of people who do not need downloads, like like more and more downloads, because they just have a pool of like 3 to 5,000 people that they're selling to, right? And the podcast is just their content that goes out to help sell that thing, right? So yeah, man, it happens a lot, and a lot of times we're doing a rebrand right now for for a group of trade schools. They have like 20 trade schools, and their personality is great. Their content is great. They have an 11-person production team, but the podcast is it has like 3 different names. It's a little too ambiguous, right? So yeah, all this stuff is podcast by podcast. It's like, it's literally goes back to when I was a mechanic. Like, I'm shining the flashlight and every car is different, you know?
Yeah, I feel you. That's interesting. So as we go through this, defining the actual avatar, like at the beginning, when you start, it's like, okay, who's going to want to watch this? Like, and listen to it rather. Who's going to want to watch it or listen to it? How do you define that avatar? So like, what kind of questions do you ask? Like as a coach, when you're like jumping on, you're like, okay, somebody's like wants to create a podcast on, I don't know, fishing. I mean, whatever it may be.
I actually have a friend with a pretty big fishing podcast.
Yeah. So how do you define that avatar? Like, who's going to want to listen to this? Well, people who like fishing, people who, work at bait and tackle stores, people who live in rural areas. There's, what are their passions? Do they wake up early? There's got to be like a way to define who this perfect avatar is.
Yeah. I mean, in a sense, there's questions that we ask to get there, but I think if you want to look at it from the lens of you're trying to create a real person. Like, you're trying to describe a person, and people are complex, right? So I also don't think that there's like, we're targeting 37-year-old vegan farmers from Ottawa, Canada. It's like, it normally doesn't get that deep. We may go that deep, and then we'll probably back it up from there. But what we try to do is look at the landscape, right? So it's like, if it is a fishing podcast, well, then let's figure out what angle within fishing. Is it saltwater? Is it freshwater? Is it just surf fishing? Is it just bass? Like, could be it all around the world, right? So, you look it up and you see, okay, there's shows that interview the best fishermen in the world. There's shows that, recap, what's that?
Sword fishing.
Yeah,
right?
sword fishing, right? Like tournaments, right? There's shows that recap tournaments. There's shows that are just about trout, but maybe it's a co-hosted show. Okay, so you're going to create the interview show about trout fishing and interview people virtually in every country who trout fish in that country, right? Like this, it's not really, it is about that ideal audience member, but it's also what leads you there is trying to create something that's not already in the market, in the podcast market, right? So then you also, I mean, dude, that's marketing, right? You also just don't really know. Right. And so a lot of people come to me and they're like, yeah, so what's the formula? I'm like, well, yeah, there is a way for us we'll define all these things, but you could get 12 episodes in and be like, oh, it's kind of something different. Like the bass community is really coming out of the woodwork here. We're just going to adapt to that.
Right. So it can become, it like almost has an organic life of its own.
It does. Yeah. 100%.
But you can still define the niche. Like, are the riches and the niches? Like, are they really there? Defining it as you go along. Do you try to dial down that niche where you're like, okay, we got that corner.
Yeah,
that's kind of where you go. And I think that's the same thing with everything: sales, marketing, podcast, content creation. It's like, what do you specialize in? What are you passionate about? What are you good at? What can you talk about? And so, like, when you're coaching people, do you have a set of questions that you go through? Like, do you have a series of, so we're on this podcast together right now, and I want to find out from you, because this is a story seller podcast, what are the best practices if I'm a new podcaster and I've just started and I'm let's say I'm virtual. What am I going to do to make an impact to start? My energy, where do I look? How do I vocalize? What is my tone? Do I keep a good pace? How do I listen well? Do you have tricks that you can pull out for us and give us some advice on how that would be, what the best practices are to make it successful?
Well, yeah, I could give those, but I'd say like the coaching does start, like you mentioned, it does start with questions, So like if you came in the door, it would just be questions. It would be me asking you, why are you doing this? You already have 2 other podcasts, right? Like, why do you want to do this one?
Because I'm crazy, dude.
There you go. Well, that's a start, and then there's about an hour of actually answering the question.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm crazy.
Yeah.
I love crazy about content. I'm crazy about creation, and I'm crazy about storytelling. And I have way too many ideas, and I think that I need that many podcasts to actually. And one of them, I don't really. It's not really mine. So
yeah, for sure, you're working within it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a co-host
There you go.
podcast.
Perfect.
So I don't have to really do as
So
much
this one
there.
is this will be your baby, your project that you
Dude,
can, fully customize. I was going to say, Matt, you're doing it right now, man. You don't know where this is going to go. Like
I do
we
not.
can't predict the future, which
So
is
let's just tell them, yeah,
really
this is
cool.
like my first episode
Yep.
of this. When I talked to
Mm-hmm.
you, I reached out to you because I was like, dude,
Yep.
what do you think about
Yeah.
me? I got a podcast that's popular. It's called Unfiltered. It gets some decent amount of downloads, and it's about recovery and sobriety, and it's just about life stories and people who have fallen from grace, man, and then come back and are revived and can, thrive in life and have come back from these tragedies.
Yep.
And that's cool, but it's not marketing, which is what I do for a living every single day. Sales and marketing and content creation, and making movies and content. So
Yep.
that's my
Yep.
passion.
Yep.
So I'm like, I got to do that because
Mm,
there's only so much you can talk about tragedy,
it's true.
before you're like, get a little burnt out, right? So here we are on this podcast, starting this right now with and creating this. And as it goes, who knows what it's going to become?
Yep.
Who knows who I'm going to reach out to? You may have people that want to jump on this with me. I don't know. You probably know quite a few people. This could be one of those podcasts that becomes very popular in terms of storytelling, sales, marketing. I could see that working.
Yeah, and maybe so you take those three, right? And it's like maybe I have a different view. Like I know a lot of people all day talk about storytelling. I do it a
Yeah.
little bit in my content, but it's not like a
Mhm.
fixture of my content. So that there you go. Maybe that's part of the angle, right? And your angle is storytelling is not an option; it's mandatory. If you want to do this, right? And then I could
Mhm.
say, "Oh, I don't agree with that." Right. And
Mhm.
so now we have a podcast, right? Because it's like, it's not like we're
Yeah.
creating the general show where we get to just, every single
Yeah.
tactic, we'll highlight
Yeah.
everything. Right. So yeah, that's kind of the way that I would couch it. And also, especially in this lens, I mean, you like sales, marketing, business, storytelling. It's like, okay, well, what are we doing differently? Is it just the studio? Is it just the professionalism? Or like, are we taking guests and then we're asking them questions that they haven't been asked before? Or am I planning the episodes ahead of time? And then this is a very like highly planned thing. And I'm not saying like that's just an option, right? Like I do episodes that are scripted, every single word essentially scripted. And then I do others that I'm interviewing my clients and I just see what they're going to say. Right. So yeah, it's kind of like I think the angle is the natural next step. It's like we have pillars. Our pillars will be sales, marketing, storytelling. And then within that, what are the opinions that we have about those things that other people don't have? Where somebody like me might be, I don't think storytelling is that important. Yeah, but you're a podcaster. All you do is tell a story, And so you start to, in us having this conversation, those things start to come out and you start telling me about how well storytelling has been the figment of my marketing and sales success is literally just being me telling my story. Okay, perfect. So then the intro to the podcast is, hey, I'm Matt. Storytelling has gotten me where I am, right? And then that's part of your story that you would embed into the intro of the podcast. So then people would either agree with that and they would continue on, or they would disagree and they would go to another podcast.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But you let them know right up front.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, here's what this is about. If you're not telling stories right now, your business will probably fail.
Boom, boom. And that's the funnel, right? The funnel is they see you organically, maybe it's just the organic funnel, right? Like somewhere on social media. It could be LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, not sure, all the other platforms you're on. Then eventually, maybe they follow, right? So then they follow you. They see 8 to 12 more posts. And eventually they see a link to the podcast. Maybe they don't click the first time. Maybe they don't click the fifth. Mm-hmm. But eventually they click. And when they click, they judge the artwork. They read a little bit of the description. And then they click play. And once they click play, you got that 30 to 60 seconds to bring them in. So if the first 4.5 seconds sounds like this. Hey, guys, welcome to the podcast. That right? That's a big effect, right? So what we do is we help you design that part so it actually brings people in, right?
Yeah, I'm there with you. I totally get that. And I thought about this particular podcast in that way, the intro, the beginning. Why am I doing this? Well, it's because I work with clients who are in their 50s, sometimes in their 60s, and they are dying,
Yep.
dude, because they do not want to create content, and they're doing seminars and they're handing out flyers. It's like
Like it's
you are becoming,
1987. It's like the internet
yeah,
doesn't exist, right?
it's like this is so antiquated. You are going to fail.
Yep.
And so you've got an option here. You can work with me. I can show you how to set up a studio that is tight. You can sit down in that chair and you can start to share some of your wealth of knowledge with either a co-host or yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
you can come up with 5 topics and talk about those topics. And you can put those out on a podcast once a month. We can cut those up for you.
Yep.
That's fine. But you got to do it and create a funnel around this. Okay. You get testimonials, you get people on your podcast, you get content, and you put it out. Otherwise, you're not building a personal brand. If you're not building a personal brand for your business, I don't know what you're going to do. I mean, I get it. There are electricians, word of mouth. There are people who don't do that. There are, people who do all kinds of jobs out there that may not necessarily need a podcast, like you said. But there's a lot that do need it.
Yeah.
There's more that do than don't.
Yeah. And if you could sell online, then you can market online, right? So it's like my plumber doesn't need this. If they did it, they would make more money, but they don't need to do it, right? Like I remember
But if they had the personality,
Yeah. Yeah.
they could have a plumbing show
Yep.
that has,
and that's
2 million
the top
views.
the 1% of the 1% of all plumbers will have the plumbing podcast, right? And that's why they're the best. And then they can teach people how to do it, right? Teach other plumbers how to do it, right? So yeah, 100%, man. Whether it's financial advisors, financial advisors is the big one. They're literally telling people, like, they're trying to use logic, but then they can't use that logic on creating content. It's like, compound interest, consistency, goal setting, management,
tax strategy.
It's like, dude, that's content
strategy,
right there, right?
retirement.
That's how content works. Exactly. It's literally like the same thing.
If you're me, right, and I work with financial advisors every day, so that is what I sell to. Like, I've taken companies, right, from 450 million in AUM to 2.2 billion in 24 months, 36 months, coming from Hollywood, this weird Hollywood thing where I was literally like making movies, and then I had to promote them. So I had to like brand them, and then I had to say, well, you make a movie and you're like, this is great. We spent $1 million on a movie, but oh, whoops, we forgot to market it. We forgot to package it up. We got to promote it. And so I had to cut my teeth there. And then I learned how to do it on social media, how to create and speak to an audience and target them.
Yep.
We had like 6 million downloads of one of our movies. It took off. I had no idea that when one of my friends called me from the financial world and at this TPA firm, he said, I need help. Like, the company's not doing great. It's like, we need to look better. Can you help us? And I'm not in that space, dude.
Yeah.
So I just went in there and I started doing it, and it just, boom, company sold in like 3 years.
Whoa.
And then I got acquired in the deal, like to work for it went crazy. And then I saw this market and I went, wow, financial advisors really do not have very much marketing going on.
Yep.
And so therefore, Story Seller Podcast, thinking about tailoring it toward the financial market.
I don't think that would be a bad idea. I think there's still gaps there. I think that having a, to use your word, unfiltered way of speaking to them to kind of show them. I have a client who I coach, and he works with advisors as he works for NASDAQ, and then he has a side business where he helps advisors get on to create content. And he knows like 5 or 10 other business owners who do something similar. And it's just, especially in that niche. I mean, our biggest podcasts are in finance. So, I mean, and I'm not a finance guy. Kind of similar thing happened to me, to be honest, man. Like, so yeah, I really see this, especially those niche financial concepts and things like that. Like, they are, if there's like a way to hedge your 401k or what, those little things where it's like, I'll never be able, I don't know. I just don't go that deep, but there's entire podcasts to be made. Like, we're in the beginning of this, no doubt.
So I could hire you to help me organize what this podcast should be on this call we're doing right now.
I was going to say, we just started. So
that's so funny.
Yeah, I love it, man.
I'm thinking, like, because I have the resume, dude, like, I'm the director of the digital experience at Transamerica. So I work on the retirement side. I work with financial advisors all day long. And if they see that title, they go, I'm going to listen to that podcast, or I'm going to
I was
talk
going to
to
say,
that guy.
leverage what you got, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe like story seller is a good concept. I have not, this is first episodes. I haven't put it up on
Mm-hmm.
Spotify. So people out there that don't know this, Spotify, all those, you got to have your first episode ready, Apple Podcasts,
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
feed you're on. So we don't have that done yet. So I could take this in any direction that I want it to take it. What's the smartest move for me? Because of the nature of my business, are the riches and the niches? Probably. I mean, I've got a funnel right now that I'm selling financial advisors on
Mm-hmm.
working with me for white label marketing and offers that I can create any kind of automation they want, any kind of funnel they
Yep.
want, anything they want can be done for them. And I'm the one writing it.
Yep.
And I've taken clients from, X amount of AUM to this amount of AUM, and I can do it for you too.
Yep. I mean, listen,
I
there's
think,
people my age doing it too, and they don't even have that kind of, body of work and experience that you have too, which especially for an older financial advisor is going to matter a lot. That matters a lot. People, I'm not saying ageism. Ageism is a different thing. I'm saying
right.
vetting you before they work with you. So you also have that denser background that like the kid who got 1 million followers on TikTok talking about finance shit, like they're not going to work with
Yeah.
him, right? Like,
No, but they would work with somebody, even though I'm all tatted up. The funny thing is I'm professional. Like everything I
yes.
do is straight and narrow, man.
Once you
I'm
start
like,
talking, then they're like, oh yeah, this guy's legit. Like he's a real
I've
professional.
I've
Yes.
never not sold a financial
Mm-hmm.
advisor on any of our products and services.
Mm-hmm.
I have a track record of 100%.
Yep.
So every time they get on a call with me, they're like, "We want to work with you. We know, I'll get them more leads in 90 days than they've ever had." Yeah, yeah. It could be like intro helping financial clients, build portfolios of over $2 billion in AUM. Whatever. There's a story there.
Yeah,
That's
I
a
was gonna
great
say,
pitch.
yeah. I mean, if you could go from I take you to X, from X to Y using Z. Okay, well now we know. It's like that's the good thing because you can go more hyper targeted. Like think about it's like okay, I have an agency and that's what I do full time. I don't have a full time job. Like I don't have anything else. Like so I have to always be marketing, selling. That's why I didn't niche for 3 or 4 years. If it's a project that can be slowly built then you can go actually is that then the argument to go more hyper targeted is actually I think a smarter idea. So just
That makes
personally,
sense.
but
People out there that have a full time, great
I was
gig,
going to say that's a massive benefit,
yeah,
100%.
that's paying them, you know, exuberant amounts of money, and then they don't have to really worry about it. They can build this business on the side. The business can, honestly, this business that I'm building could be bigger than what I'm making now, even at the
Yeah.
corporation. Just because if I get 30 clients, I'm already
Yeah, but
excelling
you could do
beyond.
that at the pace that you want to do it, and then you have
Yeah,
options, which is
hmm
the ultimate
yeah.
freedom.
And you know how it is when you're working with
Yep.
clients. Sometimes you want to say to them, you never want to give something away, but there's this part of you that Alex Hermosi's it and goes, you know what? Just give it to them for free the first couple because you're going to figure out what your service is going to be, what it's going to look like, and what you need to build for them in order to scale it and have it be
Yep.
successful. I don't necessarily have to do that because of my background. They will pay,
Yeah.
but there is that part of me that never takes the full amount or tries to gouge because,
Mm.
especially when I'm learning a market, because then I go, okay, I now know what you want and I know how I can help
Yep.
you. And if you give me a really good testimonial, hey,
I know.
then we're golden,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it's you learn the most from the hard clients, not the easy ones, right? So,
Oh, for sure.
yeah,
For
I'm with
sure.
you on that, man. Once you got us, you got us. Like, we're not going anywhere. Like
Yeah.
we're there for you. We're there for your business. It'll be to scale, to do whatever that specific thing is. For us, it'll be to launch and strategize and make sure there's those right listeners are coming in. It's like, yeah, I'm with you, man. It's always if I can add value on top, I always will.
I feel you. Well, hey, this was a great conversation. I won't keep you a lot longer, but I do want people, and I do think this episode will eventually launch because it's a great episode. Um, where can people find you? Like I saw we can book a call with you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so I
Where,
have a link. Yeah, so I have a Calendly link where if you want to just book directly with me, we can just talk through your podcast, whether that's building your audience or building the podcast or the business or a combination of those. Like we are hyper focused on launching, building, growing the podcast, but as we've discussed in the last hour, it fits. It's just one piece of that larger puzzle. So if that's what you're looking to
yeah,
do, even if you just have that idea in the back of your head of like, that I did want to launch, I thought about launching a podcast on that. Okay, yeah, let's chop it up. Let's do it. And then, yeah, LinkedIn's my biggest platform, Ryan R. Sullivan. If you type in Ryan R. Sullivan entrepreneur on Google, then all my stuff should come up. So
Nice.
Instagram, I'm a rapper too. So if you can find that, then have fun.
Yeah, it's like me. I mean, you see my
Yeah.
stuff and it's like, okay, finance guy, but then wait a second, you made a horror icon slasher movie. It's like, what? Weird, dude,
Multi-dimensional, man.
Hey, you do what you got to do. Like you
Yep.
evolve as an entrepreneur and you find different things that you're good
It's
at
true.
and you never know where it's going to lead you. You just never know where that project is going to lead you as a creator.
I would have never thought I would be here, man, for real. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah, me either. Me either. Hey, thanks for jumping on with me today. I appreciate it. I think some people are going to take some real value
I agree.
from what we discussed because it was just so powerful. Yeah, start a podcast. If you got passionate about something, right? I mean, start a podcast. And if you need help, call a coach. Like, seriously, I hired a coach a couple of months ago just to sort of help me with this business that I'm working on now. And so many ideas I would have never come up with.
For real.
It's valuable. So I'm actually going to work with you after this podcast. So people out there, I definitely highly recommend it.
Man, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you doing this podcast. Yeah, love the energy, and I can just tell you're trying to help people, man, which is that's our number one thing. We help people. So that's how we do it, man. Appreciate you.
You too, bro. Talk to you
You
soon.
got it.